Hey guys, good morning. I know it's been a while since you've seen my face and heard my voice, but hope you guys are relaxing, staying home, staying safe, staying healthy, and enjoying yourselves in this shutdown break that we've got going on here. I know this is some uncharted waters for all of us. We haven't really been through anything like this before, but I know you guys are all going to work together with your families and with everyone else to make sure that we stay safe, stay healthy, and get through all of this. Is what it is, got to deal with it. Anyway, one nice thing is that it's an absolutely beautiful morning out. Me personally, I've been a little bored, so I've been experimenting with uploading some of my normal lectures into YouTube videos. See how this goes. I've already done a few with my personal finance class. We're going to try out a few for world history now. So the first one we have is a topic that we would have covered while we were in class this week, and it's on the origins of Rome, right here. Now I know that you guys cannot see the little subtitle because my webcam screen is blocking it, but the subtitle basically asks, we talk a lot about the Romans, we know a lot about them, but where did they come from? How did they start? And that's really important to getting to know any civilization, especially one that would go on to form the largest empire the world had ever seen. You have to know, where did they come from? What was their geography like? And how did this affect their way of life? Now, as with everything else in world history, it gets a little weird at times. You can see a little thing here. There's a statue in Rome of two little boys nursing at the womb of a mother wolf. It's going to get a little interesting. We'll talk about that later. Real quick, some things that I'm going to do with these little YouTube videos that I'm putting out. First of all, in Student View, I'm going to send out some notes that would go with these as Microsoft Word documents. The notes that you have here, these would be Module 6 Stark Notes, which are on the Roman Empire, but specifically we're looking at Section 1B, if you wanted to follow along there. Also, I am going to post the textbook reading assignments online on Canvas, if you have access to that. I know that not everyone has access, so I'm not going to require you guys to do them while we're out. But if you wanted to, you are certainly more than welcome to start answering a few questions on those things. This one specifically is Module 6, Lesson 1 on the Roman Republic. If you want to get those notes out or make your way over to the Canvas webpage with the textbook assignment, feel free to pause this right now and then make your way to that. Alright, so the first thing we need to understand about the Romans, or any other ancient civilization that we study, is the nature of their geography. And that's not just a matter of memorizing geographic features and then being able to recite them, but moreover, understanding how their geography affected their way of life. So Rome, as we know very well, is located on the continent of Europe. That's what you're seeing on this entire map right here. Europe itself, I think of as just one giant peninsula. They call it a continent. I think of it as like a super peninsula. Remember, a peninsula is a body of land surrounded on three sides by bodies of water. In the case of Europe, it's the Arctic Ocean to the north, the Atlantic Ocean to the west, and then the Mediterranean Sea to the south. Other things with geography of Rome. So Europe is a super peninsula. Now Rome itself is located on the Italian peninsula, surrounded entirely by the Mediterranean Sea. The Italian peninsula, for those of you that don't know, is this body of land right here. All right, easy way to remember it, it looks like a boot that's kicking a soccer ball. That soccer ball, by the way, is the island of Sicily. But Rome is located on the boot. This is the modern day country of Italy, and Rome specifically is located right around here in the very center near the western coast of the Italian peninsula. Now the city, the peninsula itself is surrounded by the Mediterranean Sea. We'll talk about some of the benefits that brought in a moment. Also, you have a mountain range to the north of Italy. All right, and this is the Alps Mountains. I'm going to draw them right here. In modern times, they form the border between the countries of Italy and Switzerland and Austria. I'm going to go ahead and label that the Alps. But again, we'll talk about the importance of this mountain range in just a second. Rome itself was built on a river, much like many of the other great civilizations that we study. Specifically, it's built on the Tiber River, about 17 miles inland from the Mediterranean coast. And the city itself was surrounded by 7 hills, which helped them out for their fortifications and their defense purposes. So let's talk about some of the benefits that came with this Roman geography. Some of the things you need to understand. First and foremost, the Romans' way of life was influenced by the Mediterranean Sea. Much like the Greeks, the Romans were great seafarers. They knew how to sail, they built ships, and they traded with other people in the Mediterranean. And being located in the very center of the Mediterranean Sea meant that they had access, they could travel easily to places all over the sea. And this was good for them. They built up a lot of wealth for their city through their trade. Now, not only did the sea provide them with trade, it also provided them with protection. If an outside force wanted to conquer the Italian peninsula and the city of Rome, they would have had to bring a navy with them. There were times when the Greeks went in and colonized the Italian peninsula, but they never launched a full conquest. Neither did the Persians or the Egyptians or the Phoenicians or any of these other great Eastern Mediterranean powers. Speaking of protection, another benefit they got as far as protection went came from those Alps mountains in the north. This is very similar to what we've discussed before with Egypt. Remember I said, for Egypt, it was a benefit that they were surrounded by desert on all sides. Because if you wanted to conquer Egypt, you would have to bring an army through that desert, and that would be very challenging. The same thing applies for the Romans, only instead of it being a desert, they had some of the tallest mountains in the world protecting their peninsula. It would take a lot of effort to get an army through there. Spoiler alert, someone does pull it off in the future. We'll talk about that in another video. Finally, I want to talk about the climate that they had in Rome. Their climate was very, very similar to what we studied in Greece. If you remember, the Greeks had a very mild climate. It was warm. They were oftentimes known to go outside and wear loose clothing and interact and socialize with one another a lot because their climate was so nice. The Romans had a very similar climate, but they had one big advantage over the Greeks: fertile soil. Remember, the Greeks did not have great farmland in their peninsula and in their mainland in general. They had some pockets of good farmland, but as a whole, Greece was very mountainous and it did not have a lot of good farmland. Because of this, they often weren't able to provide enough food to support their entire population. So, in many cases, the Greeks got on ships and settled and colonized new lands around the Mediterranean Sea. In the case of the Romans, they had a lot of fertile soil surrounding their city. So they could grow a lot of crops and support a large population, which helps to explain why Rome would go on to eventually become the biggest, most populated city in the entire world. Alright, so let's talk about the first Romans. Now this is where that ancient story gets a little weird. This is all according to legend. We have no proof that it's true. But according to the Roman story, the Aeneid, that's kind of like their epic poem. It's like their version of the Iliad or the Odyssey. But according to the Aeneid, the city of Rome was founded in the year 753 BCE by two brothers, Romulus and Remus. According to legend, these two brothers washed ashore in a basket on the shores of the river Tiber. And they were picked up and then raised by a family of wolves. That's why in that statue you see a couple of boys suckling at the teat of a wolf. Crazy, weird stuff, I know. But they were raised by wolves and they inherited a lot of the traits of wolves. Loyalty, bravery, things like that. Until one day when they got older, those two brothers went on to build the city on the river Tiber by the Seven Hills. But one of the brothers tried to betray the other, and this led to a war. Now I'll let you take a guess which brother, Romulus or Remus, ended up winning that war. And a little hint, the city is named Rome. That should have clued you off, the fact that the city is named Rome, that the brother Romulus won the war and ultimately became the first king of the city. Now, the city of Rome. Sorry, you guys are hearing you're hearing a few sirens around me. But the city of Rome was on the Italian peninsula, and the Italian peninsula had three main cultural groups on it. In the north, you had the Etruscans. The city itself was built by the Latins, which, by the way, that's where we get the language of Latin from, and all of its derivative languages like Spanish, French, Portuguese. That's also why we call Spanish-speaking people Latinos. And finally, in the south, you had some Greek city-states. Remember, the Greeks colonized a lot of land around the Mediterranean, including the cities on the Italian peninsula in the south. The Romans would go on to borrow a lot culturally from the Greeks, especially when it came to their religion and their gods and their goddesses. So, last thing we want to talk about. Sometime around 600 BCE, those people, the Etruscans, who as we can see here, they came from the north, Greeks were in the south, and then Rome was in the center. The Etruscans went in and they conquered Rome sometime around 600 BCE. And they set up a kingdom, a monarchy. Now with them, the Etruscans brought many great innovations, including the system of numbers and writings that the Romans would use, and that we still basically use today, with some minor changes. They brought the city walls and a lot of defense systems that the army would go on to use in Rome. Rome had a great army, and a lot of this came from their Etruscan influence. In terms of architecture, they came up with the design of the arch, basically the Roman signature design in architecture. For context, the arch would look something like this. All right, it's not a great drawing, but that's one of the things they came up with. They also came up with a lot of the Roman forms of entertainment that they would go on to love, such as the chariot races and the gladiator games. We will definitely talk more about those in the future because it's so much fun to learn about it. But just know a lot of cultural influence came from the Etruscans. When it came to religious influence, a lot of that came from the Greeks, these people down here. Now, the last Etruscan king was a man named Tarquin the Proud. I know you guys can't see it, but he ruled from 535 BCE to 505 BCE. And he was very harsh and very strict. He enforced a lot of strict punishments on the Latin people, to the point that he eventually got overthrown. All right, the Latins couldn't stand him anymore. The Roman people in general couldn't stand him, and they overthrew him from power. All right, and this is what led to the development of a modified democracy that they called the Roman Republic. And that's what we're going to look at in our next video. So to recap, Rome was built on the Italian peninsula in Europe. You need to be aware of that. It was surrounded by the Mediterranean Sea, great for trade and protection. For protection, they also had the Alps Mountains in the north. And then finally, Rome had a lot of cultural influences from different groups, including the Latins, the Etruscans, and the Greeks. Hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you guys have any feedback or comments for me, please feel free to message me in the Remind app, in Canvas, on Student View, or via email. Hope you guys take care, stay safe, stay healthy. Peace.